My eyes don't see like they used to. The body grows tired, but some memories, not even time can erase. That's why today, after so many years, I decided to tell the truth. My truth. I was just a 7-year-old boy when everything changed. That day, I lost my home, my family. I even lost my name. The memory of that day still lives inside me, as if it happened yesterday. Sometimes, when the night gets too quiet, I can still hear my mother's voice calling me. Many who went through this chose to forget. I couldn't. And now that I've lived nearly all I had to live, I feel it's my duty to leave this story behind, not for pity, but so people understand, and maybe, by hearing my voice, someone out there will make sure this never happens again to another boy, in another place. Because what I lived, no one should ever have to live. I never forgot the smell of that day. The morning breeze carried the scent of wet earth, the kind you only smell after the first light rain of the season. The sun was still crawling over the treetops, and the sky had that bluish tone that only appears when the night hasn't fully gone. I was 7 years old, and that morning, everything seemed the same as every other day, but it wasn't. My mother was on her knees on the packed dirt floor, mixing corn with a bit of water flour. She hummed softly a melody I never knew the origin of, but it always made me feel safe. It was as if each note cradled me in her arms. I felt at home. My father, meanwhile, was mending an old fishing net he'd been working on for days. One day the boy will fish with me, he'd say, and I'd laugh because I barely knew how to swim. But his promise filled me with pride. Back then, a father's promise meant everything. My little sister was still asleep, curled up on a straw mat, her feet dusty and her face calm. She was only 3, far too young to know what fear was, but I already knew its scent. Even as a child, my body sensed when something wasn't right. And that day, even with the calm outside, I felt it. Maybe it was the silence, or the way my mother looked at me for a long moment before stirring the pot again. That stayed with me. Our house was simple, for wooden posts, a torn tarp for a roof, and a piece of cloth hanging in the doorway. There were no walls, just a shelter from the weather. And even so, I called it home, because that's where my people were, where I could laugh without fear, run between the cassava plants, hear the old stories my mother told while braiding my hair. There, I was still free even if I didn't know what freedom really meant. That morning, before the food was ready, my father called me. He sat with me outside and pointed to a distant tree on the horizon. When you grow up, you'll be strong like that tree, steady, even when the wind blows. He said it while staring into nothing, in a voice I'd never heard before. It was like he already knew, as if his soul could feel something was coming. But I just nodded and smiled, because all I cared about was being there with him. The sound came from far away. At first, a light gallop, like an animal moving through the trail. But it quickly became clear. It wasn't an animal. It was horses, and horses never came alone. My mother stood up suddenly, eyes wide, and pulled me inside. "Stay quiet," she whispered. Her voice trembled. It was the first time I heard fear. In my mother's voice, from inside, peeking through a gap in the doorway cloth, I saw 4 tall men, serious, armed. They looked around like they were choosing what to take. One of them pointed, another got off the horse. They said something I didn't understand, but my father understood. He stood still, like the tree he'd pointed at minutes before. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My mother held me tight, her eyes full of tears. Though none fell, they didn't force their way in. They didn't have to. Their presence alone shattered everything. Time stopped. The world collapsed in silence. In that moment, I knew nothing would be the same. The porridge cooled in the pot. My mother's song had ceased. My father's smile had vanished. And the day, which had started blue and calm, was now gray and suffocating. That was the last moment we were all together. The last breakfast. The last time I heard my mother sing without pain. The last time I heard my father promise the future. And I, just 7 years old, didn't know it was the last day I'd be able to say I had a family. They didn't come like a storm. There was no thunder, no shouting, no smoke in the air. Just the quiet sound of hooves pressing against the dry path, getting closer with every breath. From far away, it didn't look like danger, but every grown-up around me seemed to sense something I couldn't quite name. My mother stood up fast, wiped her hands on her dress, and pulled me closer. Her eyes scanned the trees beyond our house. She was listening like a deer that knows the forest better than anyone. And whatever she heard, it made her body tense. My father didn't say a word. He stood by the doorway, holding the wooden stick he always carved during quiet afternoons. But this time, he wasn't carving. He was waiting. Then they appeared, 4 men, tall, silent, seated high on horses that looked almost too big for the narrow trail. Their clothes were clean, their boots polished. One of them had a wide hat that cast a shadow over half his face. The others wore coats even though the sun was already warm. They didn't smile. They didn't wave. They looked at us like we were things like the trees, or the house, or the dirt. My heart started beating louder, not faster, just louder, as if it wanted to escape through my chest. My little sister ran outside, barefoot and laughing, not knowing. She thought it was visitors. She liked visitors. But my mother ran after her, scooped her up, and didn't say a word, only tightened her grip. That silence told me everything I needed to know. My father stepped forward just a bit. Not aggressive, not afraid, just proud, like a man trying to shield his family with nothing but his presence. One of the strangers pointed toward our home. Another one muttered something in a language I couldn't understand. My mother's fingers dug into my arm, not to hurt me, just to hold me in place, as if letting go would mean losing me. The men dismounted slowly, like they had all the time in the world, not rushed, not hesitant, just certain. They weren't here to ask, they were here to take. My father spoke first. I'll never forget his voice in that moment. Calm, clear. "We've done nothing wrong," he said. But the man didn't respond. He simply looked past him, at me. That gaze chilled me more than the coldest morning ever had. I took a step back, but my feet were clumsy. My mother knelt down beside me, whispered in my ear, "Don't speak, don't run." Her voice was soft, but it carried weight I'd never heard before. The men began walking around our home, examining things, not in a curious way, more like measuring value. One of them picked up my father's net, gave it a tug, then tossed it back down. Another looked at our fire pit, nudged it with his boot. Then one turned toward me. He didn't ask for my name. He didn't smile to make me feel calm. He just stared for a long time, as if deciding. My father stepped between us, and for a brief second, I thought that would be enough. But the man raised his hand, and with a gesture, the others surrounded him. One grabbed my father's shoulder. My mother screamed, not loud, but sharp, like a bird's cry. That sound hit me harder than any slap. I froze. My father didn't fight. He stood still, his voice low now. "Leave the boy," he said. The man shook his head slowly. Then another came behind me. I felt his hand on my back, firm, cold, final. I didn't cry, not yet. I looked at my mother, her eyes wide, mouth open, but no sound coming out. My sister, still in her arms, had started crying, maybe because she didn't understand, or maybe because she did. My father turned once more, this time not as a protector, but as a man who knew he was losing something precious. He looked into my eyes and nodded, not to say goodbye but to tell me to be brave. I didn't want to go. I didn't move. But the man behind me didn't ask. He pulled, and I stumbled. My feet dragged through the dirt I knew so well. That trail, where I used to play, where my father taught me to walk straight, where my mother sang as she carried water. The men didn't shout, they didn't strike, but their silence cut deeper than any whip. Every step away from my family was a step into something I didn't understand. The world, once familiar, became a blur. The trees no longer looked like trees. The sky had no color. My body was still, but inside, everything screamed. I looked back one last time. My mother was on her knees, clutching my sister, reaching out a hand that couldn't reach me. My father stood still, not moving, not because he didn't want to, but because he knew it wouldn't help. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I did neither. I just let myself be taken, not because I agreed, but because I was 7, and because I understood, even then, that they had come for me, and that nothing, not even the strongest love, could stop them. They lined us up without a word. The sun was already high, but it felt cold. My feet were bare on the rough ground, my hands clenched without me noticing. I stood among others, most older than me, all silent. We weren't told what was happening, but we knew. You could feel it in the air, that tight, heavy silence that presses on your chest, the kind that tells you something bad is about to happen, and there's nothing you can do about it. The man they brought forward was young, barely grown. I had seen him once or twice before. He worked fast, never spoke unless spoken to. That morning, he had collapsed from exhaustion. Too long in the sun, too little food. His knees had buckled, and the sack of roots he carried spilled to the ground. He tried to gather them quickly, but one of the overseers had seen. That's all it took. One mistake, one moment of weakness. They didn't let him speak. Two men dragged him by the arms, his feet scraping the dirt. He didn't fight. He looked dazed, like he didn't understand what was happening. They dropped him in the center of the yard. Then a third man stepped forward, taller than the rest, dressed in black, carrying the whip. I had never seen a whip up close. I had heard it, though, heard the sound it made, carried by the wind on other days, a sharp, fast crack that didn't belong in the world. It sounded like something that could cut the sky. He didn't speak, just uncoiled it slowly, as if it was a ritual. The boy looked around, maybe searching for a familiar face, maybe hoping someone would speak for him. But no one did. We were frozen, each of us afraid that a single word might turn their attention our way. The first strike landed before I could even breathe, a flash of motion, then that terrible sound. His body jolted, but he didn't cry out. The second was faster, louder. I saw his back arch, the skin already opening. The third came before the second had even finished echoing. By the fourth, he made it sound a low, broken gasp that wasn't quite a scream. I turned my head. I was just a boy. I couldn't watch, but someone grabbed my face, turned it forward. "You watch this," he said. "You learn." And so I did. I watched until my stomach turned, until my legs shook, until I stopped hearing the whip and started hearing only my own breath, loud and fast and afraid. I don't know how many times it struck. I stopped counting after 7, maybe 8, maybe 10. I remember the way the boy collapsed forward, limp, the way his hands twitched in the dirt. The silence after it ended was worse than the sound. No one moved to help him. The man in black coiled the whip again, slow and calm, as if nothing had happened. Then he walked away, just like that. The others left too. They didn't look at us. We were told to get back to work, and we did, not because we were ready, not because we didn't care, but because that's what fear does. It buries you alive while you're still breathing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing it every time I closed my eyes. The sound, the movement, the way the boy's body tried to stay upright, then failed. I don't know if he lived. No one ever said his name again. We were taught not to speak of such things, to forget. But I didn't forget. I never forgot. That was the day I stopped being a child. That was the day I learned what power looked like and what it could do. And now, after all these years, as I speak this out loud for the first time, I ask you, if you're still here, if these words meant something to you, subscribe so this story doesn't vanish like he did. They didn't tell us where we were going. They didn't have to. The message was clear in the way they moved, in the way they avoided our eyes, in the silence that wrapped around every step. I was one of many children, women, men all herded, together like cattle, moving down a narrow dirt path that stretched farther than my eyes could follow. Some walked barefoot, others had scraps of cloth tied around their feet. No one spoke, no one cried. The fear had settled too deep for that. I remember the heat pressing against my back, the way the dust rose with every footstep clinging to our skin, our mouths, our eyes. I remember the sound of chains clinking with the rhythm of movement, a dull, metal song that seemed to follow us. There was no beginning and no end to the line. Just people, shadows, lost and quiet. The men on horseback rode alongside us. They didn't speak either. They didn't need to. Their eyes did all the talking. If someone slowed down, a look was enough. A look or the sudden crack of the whip behind us, reminding everyone to keep moving. I was 7, my legs weren't strong. Every few minutes, I stumbled on rocks or roots. Once I fell hard and scraped my knee. Blood mixed with dust, but no one stopped. A man beside me, someone I didn't know, lifted me briefly to my feet and gave me a small nod. He didn't say a word. His face was like stone, but his eyes, they were kind. That moment stayed with me, a small act of mercy in a world that seemed to forget what mercy was. The hours passed slowly, and the sun kept climbing. There was no water, no food. Some fainted. When they did, they were either dragged or left. I didn't understand why we kept going. I didn't understand where there was. I just knew that here was gone. My home, my mother's songs, my father's voice, my sister's laugh, all gone. Somewhere behind me, swallowed by trees in silence. Around midday, the road changed. Trees grew thicker on both sides, and the air became heavier. The silence too. The birds stopped singing. I started to feel like we were walking into a mouth that was closing slowly behind us, swallowing us whole. One woman began to whisper a prayer. Her voice cracked, barely a sound, but I heard it. I walked behind her for a long time, repeating the words in my head, though I didn't know what they meant. Just the sound was enough, a rhythm, a thread to hold onto. We walked until the sky turned orange. The sun was setting when we finally stopped, not because they showed us kindness, but because the darkness made it hard to see. We were ordered to sit. Some collapsed immediately. Others stood, unsure. The ground was hard and cold. I curled up on my side and tried to make myself small around me. Others did the same. No fire, no food. Just sleep, if you could call it that. I didn't sleep that first night. I closed my eyes, but every time I drifted off, I was back in my home, in my mother's arms, and then it vanished again and again. I opened my eyes just to remind myself I was still there, still far from everything I had known. Morning came with more walking, more dust, more silence. I started to count my steps. I don't know why. Maybe to give my mind something to do. I counted until I forgot the number, until numbers didn't make sense anymore. Some people began to talk again, quietly. Names, places, stories, they whispered to one another like they were afraid of being heard, even though no one seemed to be listening. I listened. I wanted to know where they were from, if they had families too, if they remembered the smell of home like I did, some shared food hidden in claws, passing tiny crumbs to children too weak to walk. That was the first time I tasted something sweet in days. It was a dried fruit, I think. I let it melt in my mouth like it was gold. The journey blurred after that. Days bleeding into each other, mornings that came without rest, nights that brought no peace. My feet cracked, my skin burned, my belly ached with hunger. But worst of all was the waiting, the not knowing where we were going, not knowing what would happen when we got there, that not knowing if anyone I loved was still alive. I began to dream while walking, strange dreams. Sometimes I was home again. Other times I was a bird flying above the trees, watching myself from far away. I preferred those dreams. They felt like escape, like I was something free, even if just for a moment. One day, the path opened, the trees gave way, and I saw buildings in the distance, not homes, not places of rest. These were large, wooden structures surrounded by fences and men with weapons. People there didn't look at us. They looked through us, as if we were ghosts. They led us into a wide yard, made us sit again. Then came the waiting for hours, until someone shouted a name, then another, and another. People were taken one by one, disappearing behind doors. I waited and waited. My name was never called, because I no longer had one. From that moment on, I was not who I had been. I was not my mother's son. I was not my father's pride. I was just another number, another set of hands to work the fields, another mouth to be fed the bare minimum, another back to be broken. That was the end of the road and the beginning of something worse. The first thing they did was take our names, not with words, not by asking. They just stopped using them. One by one, people were pointed at and given new ones, simple names. Short, easy to say. Mine was not mine. It didn't sound like home. It didn't carry my mother's voice. It didn't belong to the boy I used to be. And so I became someone else, not by choice, but by force, by silence. They told us when to wake, when to eat, when to sleep. We were lined up each morning before. The sun had even stretched across the sky. If you were too slow, you'd feel it, not always with hands or whips, but with eyes, with words, with the cold. They didn't need to strike to hurt you. They knew how to make you disappear from yourself. I was sent to the fields with others. The older ones did most of the hard labor. We, the younger ones, carried buckets of water, picked small roots, pulled weeds. The heat burned our skin, our feet bled. The ground was rough, and the work never stopped. No one explained anything. You watched and learned. If you didn't, the lesson came another way. The food was plain, barely enough. A small bowl of something porridge, sometimes rice, just enough to keep your legs moving. Water came from a barrel, warm, tasted like rust, but we drank it anyway. Thirst didn't wait for taste. Nights were worse. We slept on wooden boards, shoulder to shoulder, packed and tight. There was no room to turn, no comfort. Only the sound of breathing and the occasional muffled cry. Some whispered prayers, some whispered names. I stayed quiet. I didn't want to forget my mother's face, but each day made it harder. The days blended into each other. You lost track. Time wasn't marked by calendars. It was marked by wounds that healed and reopened, by blisters that came and stayed, by the changing color of the sky. One morning, a man beside me collapsed. He had been coughing for days. They took him away and didn't bring him back. No one said anything. We just worked around the space he used to fill. That was how things went. Someone was there. Then they weren't. You learn not to ask questions, not out of obedience, but out of survival. There were moments that almost felt human. An old woman once shared a piece of sweet root with me. She said nothing, just pressed it into my hand. I chewed slowly, trying to stretch the taste across my whole mouth. Another night, a man sang low in the dark, a song in a language I didn't understand. Others joined in quietly. It was the first time I heard music again since the day I was taken. I didn't sing, but I listened. And for a few seconds, I remembered something soft, something that felt like home. We weren't allowed to speak freely, but when the guards walked away, people shared stories. Some came from faraway lands, others from villages not too different from mine. They spoke of rivers, of trees that gave fruit in the summer, of fathers who fished and mothers who danced. I said little. I was still learning how to hold memories without them hurting too much. But I listened, and I stored every word. Some nights, I whispered them back to myself, like bedtime tales no one else could hear. I saw people change. Strong men became quiet. Loud ones turned hollow. Eyes that once looked forward began to stare at the ground. But some stayed alive inside. A woman named Emma used to hum while working, not loud, not joyful, just a gentle tune that reminded her, and maybe us, that there was something beyond the fields. She told me once, they can take the body, not the spirit. I didn't understand then. I was too tired, too broken, but I held on to her words. I still do. Once, during the rainy season, the fields turned to mud. Our feet sank deep, and the work doubled. But no one slowed down. We knew what happened if you did. That week, a boy tried to run. He made it far enough that we heard the dogs before we saw the men. They brought him back, barefoot, soaked, shivering. They didn't hurt him in front of us. But the next morning, he was gone, and no one said his name again. I wanted to ask where he went. I wanted to know if he got away the second time. But silence was safer, so I said nothing. Instead, I dreamed. Not the kind of dreams that come with sleep. I dreamed while standing, while carrying, while staring at the sky. I imagined my mother's arms, my father's voice, my sister's laugh. I imagined the way the wind felt on my skin before everything changed. Sometimes, those dreams kept me standing. Sometimes they crushed me. I didn't know which was worse. Over time, I changed too. My body grew lean, my hands calloused. I stopped waiting for someone to call me by my real name. I stopped counting the days. I learned how to move without thinking, how to work without breaking. But I never forgot, I never forgave. I stored it all, every face, every word, every moment. I didn't know if I would survive, but I knew if I did, I would carry this story with me. And now, I do. The day didn't begin any differently. The sun still rose the same way, casting long shadows across the yard. The same sounds echoed through the air, the clinking of chains, the barked orders, the dragging of tired feet across the earth. I woke up with the same weight in my chest, the same dull ache in my bones, and the same silence inside my mouth. But something felt strange. I couldn't name it, but I felt it, like the air itself was holding its breath. They gathered us like always, lining us up before the day's work. The guards looked tense, quieter. One of them kept glancing toward the trees, hand resting on his belt. Another whispered something, and they both moved away. We were left standing longer than usual, long enough to feel it in our legs. That's when we heard it, distant at first, a low rumble. Not thunder, not hooves, something else. It came closer, louder, sharper. Them voices, shouts, not angry, not cruel, urgent, fast, different. Then came the first bang, a sound that cracked through the morning like lightning tearing open the sky. People screamed, the guards ran. We stood frozen, not knowing whether to duck or run or stay still. Another sound came like wood splitting, metal hitting metal, then more shouting. I saw one of the guards fall. He didn't move. The others disappeared toward the back of the house. Some of us dropped to the ground, others just stared. I couldn't move. My body was stone. Then out of the trees came men, not soldiers, not guards. Men dressed in worn clothes, carrying weapons, calling out words I didn't understand at first. One of them raised his hands and shouted, "You're free." The words didn't make sense, not then. Not to people who had been told what to do, where to go, how to live every day of their lives. "You're free," he said again. Some people cried, some laughed, some didn't react at all. I stood there, heart pounding, waiting for the punishment, waiting for the strike, but it didn't come. Instead, a woman grabbed my hand. I didn't know her. She just looked at me and whispered, "Run." So we did, all of us at first. We didn't know where to go. We ran like birds startled from trees in every direction. The men, those who had come to help, gathered us together, told us not to be afraid, that it was over, that the war had ended, that we were no longer property, no longer slaves. I didn't know what freedom meant. I didn't know where to go with it, what to do with it, but I knew I had to move. So I did. The house burned behind us. Smoke rose into the sky, black and thick. I watched it until I couldn't anymore. We walked for days, guided by those men. They fed us what little they had, shared water, told us the names of places we could go, cities, camps, freedmen's towns. Some wanted to go back to where they'd been taken from, others didn't. Too much pain, too many ghosts. I wanted to find my mother, my father, my sister. I knew it was a dream, but I held it close like a warm cloth against my chest. Every mile we walked, I looked for her face in the crowds, listened for her voice in the wind, asked questions, described her, but no one knew. The days blurred again, like they had before, only this time we weren't being driven, we were walking ourselves, choosing, or at least trying to. I found others like me, boys who had lost their families, girls with eyes too old for their faces. We stuck together, shared stories, shared silence. One night, I sat by a river and washed my hands, watched the dirt swirl away into the current. I looked at my reflection and didn't recognize the boy staring back. He looked older, harder, but there was something in his eyes, a spark, something waiting to live. A man approached me that night, one of the ones who had come through the trees. He sat beside me and said nothing for a while. Then he told me his story. He'd been born free, up north. His parents had escaped years before. He'd come south to help others find the same path. He said freedom was heavy. Said it didn't feel like joy at first, it felt like confusion, pain, loneliness. But over time, it would make sense. I asked him how long. He said, as long as it takes. I never forgot that. We kept walking. We reached a town where people helped us, gave us food, clean water, places to rest. They gave me a shirt that didn't smell like sweat and fear, gave me a blanket. It was the first time I slept without chains around my ankles. The ground still felt cold, but I dreamed differently. I dreamed of open spaces, of laughter, of my sister's face not crying, but smiling. I knew the road ahead would not be easy. We had no land, no money, no names that held power, but we had each other, and we had the will to move forward. I didn't know what tomorrow looked like, but for the first time, I knew it was mine. They say time washes things away, that the older you get, the more the pain fades, and memories soften like worn fabric. Maybe that's true for some, but not for me. Time didn't erase anything. It only carved it deeper, made the faces clearer, the voices louder. I've lived many years since those days, more than I ever thought I would. I've seen seasons come and go, watched children grow, seen fields turn from blood to cotton, and then to soil left untouched. But the past never left me. It lives in the way I walk, the way I speak, the way I listen every night. When the house goes quiet and the lamps are low, I sit and remember. I remember the hands that held mine, then let go. The eyes that looked back one last time before fading into the crowd. I remember the sound of chains, not just the clink of iron, but the way it sank into a man's spirit, heavy and cold. I carry the names of those who were never called again. The songs they used to hum when no one was watching. The stories they whispered under breath. The laughter that somehow survived in stolen moments. I carry the silence to the kind that wrapped around us when we saw someone taken, beaten, sold. The kind of silence that screams inside you for years. I've lived free longer than I lived enslaved, but still, I feel it. In my dreams, I go back. Sometimes I'm a boy again, looking for my mother's face. Sometimes I'm just running through endless woods, chased by shadows I can't name. And sometimes I'm simply standing, watching the sun rise over fields I once bled into. But I don't speak these things often. The world moves fast now. People don't always want to hear about pain that old. They say, let it rest, move on. But some things deserve to be remembered. Some stories must be spoken aloud. Even if the voice trembles, I tell mine not for pity, not for anger, but because somewhere, someone might be listening who needs to know they're not alone, that their pain has roots, that their strength does too. I've seen young folks rise up, demanding more than survival, wanting dignity, purpose, peace. And every time I see that, I feel something stir inside me, like all that loss wasn't for nothing. Like the ones we lost still walk beside us, unseen but not forgotten. I carry them with me. In the way I treat others, in the way I plant seeds I may never see grow, in the way I sit with silence and still find space for hope. If you've heard my story, if any piece of it found its way into your heart, don't let it stop here. Let it live on. Let it move through you. Subscribe to the channel, and when you're ready, keep listening. There's more to remember.